Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Cinemateq live stream for today. Today is Friday, December 27th. The main reason we're doing this is that I'm not in the office today, and I don't have any access to our typical cameras and setup gear and all that kind of stuff. So I'm going to be doing the news as a live stream today, which I think is great. I get a chance to talk with some people, get a chance to go through the news, and to talk about the things that I like talking about. So if you are new here, and maybe you're watching this live stream later on, welcome to Cinemateq. Every week on Friday, I put out a weekly news wrap-up, and my name is TJ, by the way. Very nice to meet you, or see you again. And for the last couple of weeks, we've been talking a lot about the awards race, specifically leading up to the Oscars, which are handed out on February 9th. And we're kind of in a dead period right now as far as that news is concerned. So we're going to be doing more of a typical weekly news wrap-up, which is also going to be kind of short because there just isn't much film news coming out at this time of the year, specifically in between Christmas and New Year's, because people are on vacation. There's less press releases going out, and there's just less stuff to talk about. But there is still things to talk about. So let's start off by talking about cats. And before we do that, I feel the need to remind you that I myself have a cat in my apartment. He's over there. You can't see him. He is adorable. And he might disrupt us at some point. He might jump on this flimsy table that I am live streaming from. Hey, Dory, how are you? And also just a general note about the noise. I do live in downtown Toronto, and you will be able to hear streetcars and things like that. I apologize for it, but there's nothing much I can really do about it. So let's talk about cats. On December 23rd, we got some interesting information about Cats, that it was going to be updated, that the film was going to receive an update in theaters. So people who saw the film on opening night, which would have been December 20th, and the people who saw it on, say, December 24th, would have potentially have seen a different version of the film. And this all came about because the director was working on changes to the film up to about a couple of hours before it actually debuted. And this apparently, and he was working on it for like 36 hours straight leading up until that point. So this led to some mental mistakes, some gaps, some parts of the VFX were not properly finished. The most prominent example of this, and you can find this on Twitter, I believe it was, what was her name? A reporter from Variety, Janelle Riley, posted on Twitter a photo of Judi Dench in the film, and her hand is shown about here. And you can see that it is her human hand, and it contains a ring. And so this was just something that was missed, and the VFX artist had to go back and reinsert that shot of the hand actually being changed. And so we don't actually have a final count of everything that was changed. We just know that there are two different versions of the film. And if you were to go see Cats in theaters today, you absolutely should be seeing the updated version. And you can look for that scene of Judi Dench just kind of standing with some other cats all around her, and just take a look at her hand, and that will tell you whether or not you are seeing the new version or the old version. So despite what we have talked about with the film in the past, and despite the reviews of it, there was still a chance that this film could be nominated for a Best VFX Oscar award. And it's a strange thing when a film changes itself during its initial run. It opens it up to this idea of, well, what version of it is actually going to compete in the Academy Awards, and will it be allowed to use that new version? And so on December 24th, The Wrap reported that the Academy would allow the new version to compete in the Oscars. And this was an interesting move on their part. I don't think this is something that they had to do. They probably could have just said no. but it's also something that is technically allowed within the Academy's own rules. So in this particular case, the film was still in its initial eligibility run, which is the first 7 days that it is open in Los Angeles County. And as long as that run begins before January 1st, it's considered to be a 2019 film. And so within that first 7 days, if the film is changed, it's fine, and just the updated version of the film will be used. For a couple of the articles I was looking at for this, the example of Once Upon a Time in Hollywood was also brought up, in that it was released initially early in the year as the, I guess, first version of it. And then a new version of the film was released a few months later with about 10 minutes of additional footage that Quentin Tarantino added in. And so even though both of those films technically met the eligibility requirements, being shown in Los Angeles County, being shown for a week, etc., it would be the first version of the film that was actually going to be used for the Oscars competition, because according to Academy rules, a film cannot be altered after its first run of eligibility. So any changes made to the film after that first 7-day window, in the case of Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, they're just not being counted for the Academy Awards at all. And this is, I can't think of a time when this has happened in this particular way. Like, this is a truly unique case. There have been other examples of films being altered in their original run. You can think of The Shining. The Shining is a great example of this, where Stanley Kubrick demanded that edits be made to the film after it had been sent to theaters. And I believe there was some kind of proof that was required, that theaters had to send back the parts that were cut out, and then they had to go through a list and make sure that every single release print had those changes made to it. And I believe that the film that was removed was destroyed. And so there's been like this little bit of controversy surrounding that film as to what is, is there an alternate ending? What was different about what Kubrick took out, etc. I don't think that Cats will get that much notoriety, but maybe it will. So yeah, the Wrap did a very good wrap up of this, of the eligibility of the film, but it all seemed to be for naught. It all turns out that all of these changes, all of these little tweaks, didn't matter in terms of the eligibility of Cats for the Academy Awards, because it appears that Universal is just straight up dropping its campaign for it. It's not present at all in any of the materials that they're sending out, or even what they're making available to Academy members. So it was reported by Variety, and this would have been a couple of days ago, would have been fairly recently, that Cats has been removed from Universal's For Your Consideration page, leaving Us, 1917, Queen and Slim, the new How to Train Your Dragon, Abominable, and The Secret Lives of Pet 2 as the studio's only Oscar hopefuls. So yeah, obviously this means that Universal is no longer pushing Cats as an awards contender. This also I thought was interesting. A source for Variety stated that Cats is not available on the Academy's streaming platform that members use to watch all of the films being put forward for consideration. So even like the Academy is just not being given the film, and people who are members of the Academy cannot watch it. And this to me is the clearest indication that Cats is just not getting into the Oscars. It's not getting into the Oscars at all. It has absolutely no shot, even though it was shortlisted for Best Visual Effects, which to me is kind of insane. Like, to be shortlisted for an Oscar and then to not be viewable by the Academy. This is something that I don't really know the history of to any kind of expert degree, but I can't imagine that happening previously in the history of the Oscars, or what a previous example of that would be, being shortlisted and then not being made available to Academy members to actually see to vote on. But I think that just demonstrates the degree to which Universal is just abandoning this film. And one more interesting thing that was mentioned in this Variety article that I wanted to bring up, we talked about some of the categories that had already released their short lists a little while ago. And one of the categories that I didn't touch on was the best original song, because I just hadn't seen enough of the films and I had no real way of making a prediction or doing anything like that. And it was noted in this Variety article that the only original song in Cats, which was "Beautiful Ghosts" by Andrew Lloyd Webber and Taylor Swift, wasn't even shortlisted for the best song, for the best original song. And that once again just really hit home that the Oscars, the Academy just doesn't care about Cats, that they don't want that film to be associated with them at all. But also, if you feel like there needs to be a little bit of justice for Cats, that song did get nominated for a Golden Globe, which probably says way more about the Golden Globes than it does about anything else. They probably, maybe, just want Taylor Swift to show up, and they figured that that would be a good way to make that happen. Checking in with the chat, Dory talking about seeing the Broadway version of Cats and the 1998 Blu-ray version before watching the new version. The older versions had better dancing and singing. I believe you 100%. I saw Cats last night. I knew that I was going to be talking about this, and so I thought it would be a good idea to just hop over to my local cinema and watch the new Cats. I feel like it was projected poorly in that, and maybe Dory, since you've seen the new version, you can speak to this. It felt quiet to me. The sound mix felt quiet, and it felt very forward-facing. Like there wasn't any advantage being taken by the surround sound, anything like that, and everything just felt kind of muted. Whether or not that was the film or whether or not that was how the theater was showing it, I don't know. I like to believe that when a studio spends $100 million making a musical, some of that money goes into the actual sound mixing, because that's your film, basically. You know, as much as film is a visual medium, when you're making a musical, the sound has got to pop. Otherwise, nothing is memorable. And there were also some strange moments that I found, like when Jennifer Hudson was getting her like Academy moment, sort of in the same way that Anne Hathaway got in Les Miserables, that the crescendo of the instruments actually overpowered her voice, which seemed like a strange mixing decision on the part of the filmmakers. I don't really know why they would have decided to go that route. Just checking back in with the chat again. Dory apparently watched over 150 films this year. All of them were forgettable. The director unintentionally made the most hated film in 2019. I don't know if Cats is going to be the most hated film. I think that accolade belongs to The Rise of Skywalker. I think the reaction that people had to Cats was very much of confusion and not really understanding what it was supposed to be. And so there wasn't really a lot of vehement hatred, vitriol being put on the film. Whereas The Rise of Skywalker, there was a lot. There was a lot of hate thrown at that film, and rightly so, in my opinion. But we can leave that for the end, because there are a few more news things that I would wish to discuss. First of all, I was just talking about the general desert of award season news that we are currently in. For anyone who has been interested in the Oscar race and lead up to the Oscars, there's a great website called Gold Derby, which keeps track of a lot of these things that I've been talking about. And one of the resources they have that is amazing is a calendar of when all of the big awards that give us a good indication of what's going to happen at the Academy Awards. They tell us when the voting nominations open, when they close, when the nominees are announced, when the award shows actually happen. And so we can actually take a look at when we're going to be finding out certain information. And so for like right now, there's nothing. And there isn't anything of note until, really January 2nd, which is when the Oscar nomination voting opens. And then the next big one after that is January 3rd, when the American Society of Cinematographers, they announce their nominations. And so, as I mentioned before, last week and maybe the week prior, when we're talking about Oscar nominations, those nominations are being done by people who are in the specific tract of the Academy that they chose when they entered. So Steven Spielberg is in the director track, Roger Deakins is in the cinematographer track, etc. And so obviously the American Society of Cinematographers is going to have a lot of overlap with the people who are voting in the cinematographer track. And so when they announce their nominations, that will give us a pretty clear indication of what is going to be nominated for an Oscar for Best Cinematography. They also do an award for Best Documentary at this award show, or at this award nomination process. So that could also give us a bit of a clue as to what might be performing well in the feature-length documentary category, and whether there might be an upset coming in. Although I think, because of the way Apollo 11 was kind of marketed as having like all of this amazing new footage that was shot in 70 millimeter, and it was being shown in IMAX in some theaters and things like this, I feel like the cinematographers are probably going to latch onto that, much like a lot of other critic circles have. But we're just going to have to wait and see. And it's worth noting that the next weekly news wrap-up would be on January 3rd, except I will once again not be in the office, so I will be doing another one of these live streams talking about all of the film news. And so one of the things we're likely going to be focusing in on are those award nominations from the American Society of Cinematographers. So that's something to look forward to. And then the next big award after that are the Golden Globes on January 5th. And I've been thinking about live streaming the Golden Globes, doing like a live reaction to it. If that's something that you guys would be interested in, please let me know in the chat. Please let me know in the comments, because I would be totally up for that if we can get a good group of people in here just talking about what's going on and the implications that it has for the Oscars. And then, yeah, so like I said, Gold Derby, there's a link to it in the description below. Check out all of these, because we're going to be talking about a lot of these awards: the Producers Guild Awards, the ACE Awards, the SAG Awards, the American the American Society of Cinematographer Awards, the Directors Guild Awards. That usually is a good indicator for editing. At least it should be, if the DGA is anything like the Directors Guild of Canada, which I used to be a part of. And then this will, of course, all lead up to the Oscars on February 9th. So that's where a lot of the future content of this channel leading up to the Oscars is going to be coming from. Just going through a lot of these awards, talking about how they're going to affect or not affect the Oscar race as a whole. And then with that all said, there was one piece of news that I did want to touch on just a bit, because it grinds my gears a little bit, especially because it involves Disney, Star Wars, and the LGBTQ community. It's a bit of just silly corporate bullshit, and when it comes to Disney, I have no problem highlighting these moments when they mess up, when they screw up. So it was uncovered very recently. I believe this news broke on the 24th or the 25th, so just over Christmas, that Disney had removed a very minor shot from the Rise of Skywalker of two women kissing during the final celebration sequence of the films, and that this shot was being removed specifically for the film's release in Singapore. And in Singapore, being gay, I think being a gay man, I'm not sure if it applies to women as well, but I do just believe that being gay in Singapore is outlawed, and that films that are films that have that kind of content in it, LGBTQ content really of any kind, are often restricted to higher age ranges for their rating system. And so in Singapore, for The Rise of Skywalker, it appears that in order to keep a PG-13 rating, that scene was removed. This would have happened because the next rating up from PG-13 is NC-16 in Singapore specifically, which means that no person under the age of 16 would have been allowed to go into the film. And as Star Wars essentially made for children, according to George Lucas. I imagine that Disney just didn't want to risk losing a part of their audience. And I hate that they did this. We also just need to note that so far we don't know if the scene was removed in other markets. The film has been released in China, as an example, and no word as to any kind of censorship going on there, surprisingly enough. And it's also worth mentioning that the reaction to the kiss itself was celebrated by some, but also derided by others as just being tokenism, essentially putting in two women kissing, and then the creators and the people who made the latest Star Wars and have been responsible for the sequel trilogy are able to take a victory lap and position themselves as being champions of LGBTQ rights and representation and all of the rest. And I tend to fall on the side of the argument that this is just tokenism, that nothing of weight, of seriousness can be taken from Disney's decision to include the scene in the film. And I think that is just strongly underlined by the fact that they were so easily able to remove it, so that they could appease what ends up being a very small section of people in Singapore. I believe when I was reading through one of the articles about this, it was mentioned as to the total box office revenues that The Rise of Skywalker and even The Last Jedi got in Singapore, and it was around $4 million. So this is a film that will likely go on to gross worldwide over $1 billion. And Disney just really wanted to make sure that they didn't lose out on that $2-ish million, so that they could, have a better box office run and have better numbers. Even though in the grand scheme of things, Disney definitely doesn't need an extra $2 million. And maybe, just maybe, they could have stood by the principles that they claim to represent and actually support the LGBTQ community in Singapore, but no, apparently not. And so I guess, there are just two points that I really just want to make on this subject. The first is that when it comes to the presentation and distribution of film internationally, and the companies that really focus on distributing internationally, and who have a major focus on that kind of distribution, they will always do what is best for their bottom line. And if that means heavily censoring or altering a film in order to please a local audience, they absolutely would. They are not interested in being the progressive force of change that they are capable of being. They just want to appear like the good guys where they can and not upset viewers in other regions. And I think we should hold companies like Disney like this to a higher standard. We should demand more of them. For decades and decades and decades, Hollywood has been perfectly fine being a purveyor of change, or at least pushing the American ideal and the American dream to countries all over the world through film. And now that their bottom line is subject to so much international box office, they just feel like it's totally fine to drop the ball and to allow their films to be censored in this way that goes counter to our own values in this country, especially in North America. The United States and Canada specifically are the countries that I feel comfortable speaking for in that regard. So Disney, do better, and everyone else, do better. And then also, the second point that I wanted to make on this is that the people who are behind the scenes at Disney when it comes to the creation of this film, so we're talking about J.J. Abrams, Kathleen Kennedy, Bob Iger, whoever else that might be, we need to let them know that representation means something different than what they think it means. Representation is just not something that you casually throw up on the screen and that can be removed later. Representation means that people from the LGBTQA space are central figures and whose connection to each other is an integral part of a film. Like imagine Han and Leia, their romance that goes all throughout the initial trilogy, and now just imagine that the gender of one of them is swapped, and boom, representation. That's what it is. I also feel like as a straight white man, I need to be doing more to raise up the voices of people in the community who are going to have a lot more interesting things to say on this. I just essentially have a bit of an outrage reaction to it, even though it doesn't affect me on a personal level. And so I really want to try to use this channel in the future to raise up those voices and to have those kinds of conversations. And as the channel grows, I hope I can do that. So just in short, I'm a little peeved at Disney for doing this. I know I shouldn't be surprised that the giant corporation is trying to make money, but that's kind of where it stands. And yeah, and Disney, just do better. Just be better. Don't be evil, as Google once famously said. Or I don't know if they actually said that, but it was assigned to them. So that was basically all of the news that I wanted to talk about today. And so I'm going to go back to the chat over here and just see, was there any film news that you guys wanted to talk about, or any kind of, really just anything that popped up over the last week? Be happy to chat and talk about it. I do see, Dory just said that 1917, the hype is real. That's what I've been hearing. I'm so excited to go see it. I don't think I'll be able to see it today. I know that it's in limited release right now because it needed to get out for its Oscar campaign, for Oscar consideration, and it's going to be opening wide sometime in January. I'm assuming that it is available to see somewhere in Toronto. I just haven't checked out where yet. But yeah, that hype feels so good. It looks and feels so good. And then we had Ozge waving hello. And yeah, Dory, going back to your previous comment about The Rise of Skywalker was great compared to The Last Jedi, I do disagree with that. I feel like The Last Jedi was the superior film, and I feel like The Rise of Skywalker is really going to be remembered as a kind of prequel film where, I remember being like 13, 14, however old I was in high school. So maybe it would have been like 15, 16, going in to see Attack of the Clones and coming out after my first viewing and being like, oh, that was so good. I really love that movie. That movie's totally great. And Star Wars is amazing. And it's the best thing in the world. And then I saw it again in the theaters and I was like, oh, maybe it's just fine. Maybe it's just an okay film. And then after further rewatchings and seeing all of the other, seeing everything else that's said about the films, looking at the film, talking about the film, it's bad. Attack of the Clones is a bad film. And I think that's where we're eventually going to end up with Rise of Skywalker, with the people who initially had a positive reaction to it. At least in some cases. I don't want to put words in your mouth. I don't know how about what you saw in the film and what you liked about it. But I do think that it was poorly made, and opinions of it, at least among the outside of the critics who have pretty much said it's not very good, the people who were sort of propping it up on Metacritic and Rotten Tomatoes and things like this, their opinions will slowly start to change over time, over subsequent rewatchings. But and I think, Dory, you just added on to your 1917 hype being real, that it must be seen in a crowded theater. The tension and explosions make the theater like a football game. That's interesting. I wouldn't have thought I wouldn't have thought of that comparison. That's great. I have heard that the tension in the film is palpable, and part of that I think is because of the one long take that they try to do, or at least the very long takes that they do try to use throughout the film. I haven't really talked about this, but it's kind of a function of the long take, is that you tend to build tension in the viewer, because as the take goes longer and longer and things start to get more complicated, you become more anxious as to whether or not something is going to go wrong and that the take will just fall apart. This is something that is absolutely true when you are doing a long take. When you're doing a long take in person, like when you as a filmmaker are trying to do a long take, because you're just basically hoping that all of the actors hit their cues and nothing goes wrong. And if something does go wrong, you're able to recover in a way that makes it seem like you didn't actually screw up. And then you feel that as a viewer to a lesser degree, but it's still there. And that tension just keeps building up inside of you, because you're like, what if this all goes wrong? What if a mistake just happens? And yeah, I think if you are into one take films, or you want to see more of that kind of thing, I would highly recommend checking out a film called Victoria. It's a German film that came out a few years ago. I think it was 2014 or 2015. And it is a true one take film. There are no hidden edits in it. It is just one long 2-hour take. And it's honestly a feat in filmmaking that is unmatched to my knowledge. You can have discussion as to whether or not you think it's a good film, but as a technical achievement, I can't think of anything that even comes close to it in terms of executing on a one take, especially knowing that it was a true one take, where you start with a character and the journey that you go on with this character in real time is nuts. It's absolutely nuts, everything they go through. And they tend to raise the stakes as you go through it. So the main action set piece, the main moment of climax in the film, does still take place in the last 20 minutes of the film. So for an hour and 40 minutes, they're doing all this stuff, which is relatively simple compared to what they're about to do. And then they get to this one section, this one moment, and they have to do very complicated movements, very exact movements, and very exact reactions. And it all works. It's all just very good. And so I would recommend checking that out for sure. And if you're more into horror movies, I think you should look at One Take for the Dead, or One Take of the Dead. It's a Japanese film. It's on Shudder right now. They do a true one take, but it's not the whole film. But I don't want to say much beyond that, because I think it ruins one of the nicer surprises of what the film actually is. So that's another good one to check out if you enjoy one takes. I will say about the one take in One Take for the Dead, or One Cut of the Dead, whatever it's called, that they play on the idea of tension and screw ups in an interesting way. The tension isn't really there because of how they deflate that tension throughout the film, and it lends itself more to comedy, because the film is a horror comedy. So that, yeah, it's like a reimagining of what a one take film should be, and it's good. It's good. It's fun. It's a good zombie movie. Yes. So that looks like all of what has been said in the chat. Pretty much all I wanted to talk about. So I guess we'll just end it right there. Thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in, for chatting with me, and for saying hello. Like I said, I'm going to be back doing this again in a week. There will be another live stream, and on that one, we are going to be talking about the nominations for the excuse me. We are going to be talking about the nominations for the American Society of Cinematographers. So the stream itself will be dependent on when those nominations are announced. Hopefully it's early in the morning, and then we can have another kind of early afternoon chat. If you prefer something later in the afternoon or in the evening, let me know. I'm happy to delay it a bit, because I'd rather have as many people as possible be able to stop in and enjoy this little live stream that we do on occasion when I don't have access to a real camera. So with all of that said, I'm going to sign off. Thank you for watching. Please make sure to subscribe to Cinemateq and to like this video. Appreciate it if you would do that. And yeah, so I'll talk to you next time. Have a good weekend. Bye.